The Forge of Shadows. The abandoned Meridian Steel Works squatted against the November sky like a metal cancer, its smokestacks reaching toward heaven with the desperate hunger of dead fingers. Angelica Jones, known to the world as Firestar, stood at the facility's rusted gates, her breath forming ghostly wisps in the frigid air. The microwave radiation that coursed through her cells should have kept her warm, but something about this place made her bones ache with an inexplicable chill. "The thermal readings are off the charts," she whispered into her comm unit. "Whatever's in there, it's not natural," Static crackled back. "Firestar, this is Control. We've lost 3 emergency response teams in the past week, all found as well as ash. The city's counting on you." Angelica closed her eyes, feeling the familiar warmth building in her chest. Her powers had always been a blessing and a curse, the ability to manipulate microwave radiation, to fly, to create devastating flames. But she'd learned control, learned to be a hero instead of a weapon. Today she prayed that would be enough. The gates groaned open at her touch, metal warping and melting like butter. Beyond lay a maze of concrete corridors and empty chambers, their walls blackened by decades of industrial fire. Her footsteps echoed hollowly as she made her way deeper into the complex, following the heat signature that bloomed like a malignant flower on her enhanced senses. The temperature rose with each step. Paint peeled from the walls in long leprous strips. Emergency lights flickered and died as she passed, their plastic housings beginning to bubble and warp. Whatever waited ahead generated heat that made her own flames seem like candle flames before a solar furnace. "I know you're here," she called out, her voice steady despite the growing dread that seemed to seep from the very walls. "Show yourself," laughter answered her. Not human laughter, but the sound of wood cracking in a fire, of glass shattering from thermal shock. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the industrial maze, until she couldn't tell which direction it originated from. The corridor opened into the main foundry, a cathedral of rust and shadow. Massive furnaces lined the walls like ancient altars, their mouths gaping black and cold. Overhead, a network of pipes and catwalks created a geometric web against the distant ceiling. And in the center of it all, where the workers had once poured molten steel, something waited. It had once been human. Angelica could see that much in the charred remnants of a lab coat, in the twisted metal of what might have been glasses. But the fire had changed it, transformed it into something that existed in the space between matter and energy. Its form shifted constantly, sometimes a humanoid shape wreathed in flames, sometimes a pillar of liquid fire, sometimes nothing more than dancing heat distortion against the air. "Dr. Marcus Hawthorne," Angelica said, recognizing the nameplate that still hung from the creature's neck like a grotesque medal. "The physicist who worked on Project Prometheus. You were declared dead in the explosion 5 years ago." The thing that had been Hawthorne turned toward her, and she saw its face, or the impression of a face, mapped in flame and shadow. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of a blast furnace opening. "Dead?" Fire rippled across its form like water. "I have never been more alive. Do you know what it's like, little flame bearer? To burn without being consumed, to exist as pure energy, unfettered by the weakness of flesh." "I know what it's like to control fire," Angelica replied, raising her hands. Microwave energy began to build around her fingers, visible as a soft golden glow. "And I know what it's like to choose not to let it control me." Hawthorne's laughter filled the foundry again. "Control? You think your tiny spark constitutes control? Watch, child. Learn what true fire can do." The creature raised one burning arm and the foundry erupted into chaos. Ancient furnaces roared to life, their cold mouths suddenly blazing with white-hot flame. Pipes overhead burst, spraying superheated steam that would have flash-cooked a normal human. The air itself seemed to ignite, creating walls of fire that danced and writhed like living things. Angelica threw herself skyward, her flight power carrying her away from the initial assault. But the heat followed her, reaching with grasping tendrils that singed her hair and made her costume smolder. She spun in midair, directing her own flames downward in controlled bursts, trying to create a clear path through the inferno. "You cannot fight fire with fire, little star," Hawthorne called from below. "I am fire. I am the heart of the sun brought down to earth. Your flames are nothing compared to mine." To prove his point, he gestured again, and a geyser of molten metal erupted from the floor where Angelica had been standing moments before. The liquefied steel arced through the air like a deadly rainbow, spattering against the walls and ceiling. Where it touched, everything began to burn. "Maybe not," Angelica gasped, dodging another blast of superheated air. "But I don't have to outburn you. I just have to outsmart you." She'd been analyzing the creature's energy patterns since the fight began, using the enhanced perception that came with her powers. Hawthorne wasn't just fire. He was a specific type of thermodynamic reaction, a fusion of human consciousness with runaway nuclear combustion, and every reaction had a weak point. Banking sharply, she dove toward the nearest furnace, deliberately flying close to Hawthorne's position. As expected, he lashed out with a tendril of pure flame, trying to engulf her. At the last second, she twisted away, allowing the attack to strike the furnace's control panel instead. Sparks flew as the delicate instruments overloaded. The furnace's safety systems, designed to prevent exactly the kind of thermal runaway that had created Hawthorne, began to activate. Emergency coolant flooded the chamber, creating vast clouds of steam that obscured the creature's vision. "Clever," Hawthorne admitted, his voice now edged with something that might have been concern. "But steam is just another form of heat energy. You've only given me more to work with." He was right, but Angelica was counting on that. She'd noticed something in his attack patterns, the way his flames always sought the path of least resistance, the way he instinctively absorbed thermal energy from his surroundings. Like any fire, he needed fuel to maintain himself. "Control wants an update," she said into her comm, deliberately speaking loud enough for Hawthorne to hear. "The creature is contained in the main foundry. Recommend immediate deployment of liquid nitrogen suppression systems." Liquid nitrogen? Hawthorne's form flickered, becoming more volatile. "They wouldn't dare. The thermal shock would level half the district." "Try me," Angelica replied. But privately she was hoping it wouldn't come to that. The city couldn't afford the collateral damage, and she wasn't sure even she could survive the kind of temperature differential that would result from flash freezing a being of living fire. Instead, she implemented the plan she'd been forming since the fight began. Flying in a tight spiral around the foundry, she began to systematically target every heat source in the facility. Her microwave bursts, precisely controlled, overloaded electrical systems and disrupted the thermal dynamics that Hawthorne was using to sustain himself. "What are you doing?" the creature demanded, lashing out with increasingly desperate attacks. Each blast of flame was slightly weaker than the last. "Starving you," Angelica said simply. "You're not just fire, Dr. Hawthorne. You're a specific type of combustion reaction, and like any reaction, you need the right conditions to continue. Remove the fuel, remove the oxygen, disrupt the thermal equilibrium." "No." Hawthorne's form began to contract, pulling in on itself like a dying star. "I won't go back to being nothing. I won't return to the cold, dark grave." For a moment, Angelica felt pity for the creature. She could see the human consciousness trapped within the flames, the brilliant mind that had sought to transcend mortality only to become something monstrous. But pity wouldn't bring back the emergency responders who had died, wouldn't undo the terror he'd spread through the city. "You don't have to be nothing," she said gently, continuing her systematic elimination of heat sources. "But you can't be this. You can't be a killer." "I never meant," Hawthorne's voice was growing fainter, more distant. "The experiment was supposed to create clean energy. I only wanted to help humanity move beyond fossil fuels, beyond the limitations of conventional power." "I know," Angelica said. She'd read his research papers, had seen the humanitarian goals behind Project Prometheus. "But good intentions don't justify the means, and they don't excuse what you've become." The foundry was growing cooler now, the ambient temperature dropping as Angelica systematically eliminated every source of thermal energy. Hawthorne's form continued to contract, becoming more solid and more human with each passing moment. "Please," he whispered, and now his voice was purely human, filled with fear and regret. "I don't want to die, not again." Angelica hesitated for just a moment. In that fraction of a second, she saw not a monster but a man who had made a terrible mistake, who had paid a price beyond imagining for his hubris. But then she remembered the ash piles that had once been rescue workers, remembered the families who would never see their loved ones again. "I'm sorry," she said, and delivered the final, precise burst of microwave energy that disrupted the last of the thermal patterns holding Hawthorne's consciousness together. The creature collapsed, flames guttering out like a candle in the wind. What remained was recognizably human. The body of Dr. Marcus Hawthorne, somehow preserved within the fire that had consumed him 5 years ago. He was breathing, alive, but unconscious. Angelica landed beside him, checking for vital signs. His pulse was weak but steady, his breathing shallow but regular. Somehow, in ending his existence as a creature of living flame, she had restored his humanity. Whether that was a mercy or a curse, only time would tell. "Control, this is Firestar," she said into her comm. "Target is neutralized and contained. Request immediate medical evacuation and high-security transport. And send a trauma counselor. He's going to need one." As sirens wailed in the distance and emergency vehicles raced toward the foundry, Angelica stood guard over the unconscious form of Marcus Hawthorne. The abandoned steel works seemed somehow smaller now, less menacing. The shadows that had felt so oppressive were just shadows again, and the rusted machinery was just the bones of a dead industry. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Hawthorne's research had been part of a larger project, and somewhere out there other experiments might be continuing. Other brilliant minds might be walking the same path that had led Marcus Hawthorne into darkness. She would be ready for them when they emerged. After all, someone had to stand between the light and the shadows, between humanity and the monsters that humanity's own ambition could create. The forge of shadows had been extinguished, but somewhere else other fires were just beginning to burn.